All right, ready to dive into, well, the ultimate origin story. Because this time, we're tackling the book of Genesis.
Oh, Genesis, now we're talking.
We're talking creation myths, forbidden fruit, sibling rivalry, you name it, Genesis has got it.
It's all there. The foundation of so much, really.
And you guys provided a mountain of sources on this one, so
We've been digging.
consider us your Sherpas, guiding you through the peaks and valleys of, well, everything from that Garden of Eden all the way to Joseph and his incredible ascent to power.
And you know what gets me? It's how these stories, written thousands of years ago, still resonate so deeply. We'll unpack why they've had such a massive impact on Western culture, from art and literature to, believe it or not, even the very foundations of law.
Let's kick things off the very beginning. No time travel required. Genesis, it doesn't waste any time. Jump straight into creation. But what always gets me is it's not just one creation account, it's two.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? It's like, what's with the double feature?
That's the question, isn't it? It's one of the first things people notice about Genesis, and it's a question that's kept scholars busy for centuries. But it leads to some really, really fascinating possibilities. Like, in account 1, you encounter a god who's, well, imagine a master architect, right? Creating with this incredible sense of purpose, of order.
Yeah, it's all very, and then there was light, and then sky, and then land, and then all the living creatures. Like, boom, boom, boom.
Exactly. It's like witnessing this grand symphony unfold, and the emphasis there is really on God's power, this incredible universe, designed with, of course, humanity as the pinnacle, created in God's image.
Right, very majestic, very awe-inspiring. And then account 2 rolls around, and things get a little more, well, dare I say, personal.
Oh, absolutely. In account 2, we see God, getting their hands dirty, so to speak, literally forming humans from the dust of the earth. This is a God who's intimate, who's taking walks in the cool of the evening, engaging in conversation. It's less about raw power here and more about this deep personal connection between, creator and creation. And of course, it's where we meet Adam and Eve, that infamous Garden of Eden. And oh yeah, that whole concept of free will gets thrown into the mix.
Which is, let's be honest, where things start to get really interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Because embedded in these two, very different creation narratives, you even see these subtle clues, like the different Hebrew names for God being used.
Precisely. Right from the first page, it's like the biblical authors are inviting us to consider that there might be multiple ways to understand the divine, multiple ways to approach this whole mystery of creation.
Right, like they're saying, hey, there's more than one way to look at this.
Exactly. And that, my friend, is where it gets really interesting. Because these differing accounts, they aren't just a textual quirk, right? They feed directly into those age-old theological and scientific debates about the origins of the universe. Debates that, by the way, are still raging today.
It's still going strong. So it's like Genesis isn't just laying out a single version of events, it's sparking a conversation, a debate that continues to this day.
Which is what makes it so endlessly fascinating.
Okay, before we get lost in the vastness of the cosmos and everything,
It's easy to do.
let's talk about what happens after creation, because that's when things go from paradise to, well, let's just say it doesn't involve harp music and lounging around.
To put it mildly, chapters 3 and 4 of Genesis, they tell the story of Adam and Eve, a story that, resonates with cultures across time and continents. The temptation, the fall from grace, and ultimately, the consequences.
So we've got the Garden of Eden, we've got that tempting fruit that's just begging to be plucked, and of course, a serpent whispering promises. But I've always wondered, what do you make of that serpent? Is it literally a talking snake, or is there something more to it?
Ugh, the serpent. Such a simple image, yet it sparked endless debate and interpretation. Some see it as, yes, a literal creature, while others view it as more of a representation of temptation itself, that voice inside all of us that urges us to take the easy path, to indulge in what we know we shouldn't.
That little voice, go on.
Exactly. And then there's the question of that forbidden fruit, right? What does that represent? Knowledge, disobedience, this insatiable desire for something that's just beyond our grasp. Genesis, like any good story, it doesn't spoon-feed us the answers. It invites us to wrestle with the ambiguity, with the profound questions it raises.
It's like we're almost hardwired for these big questions, aren't we? What does it even mean to have free will? What is sin, really? And these stories, they offer a framework for exploring the human condition, even if they don't always offer easy answers.
Absolutely. And the drama only intensifies in the very next chapter, because we go from the first humans to, well, the first siblings.
Cain and Abel.
And let's just say they set the bar pretty high for family dysfunction.
Oh yeah, talk about sibling rivalry. This is it on an epic scale.
Yeah.
You try to offer what you think is a pretty stellar sacrifice to God and your brother.
Yeah.
Well, let's just say it doesn't end well for Abel.
It's a stark, even brutal portrayal of jealousy and rage, those primal emotions that can, drive us to commit unspeakable acts. But, and here's an intriguing detail from chapter 4 that often gets overlooked. Cain, despite committing the first murder, is marked by God for protection.
Oh, interesting.
He's cursed to wander the earth, yes, but he's also shielded from harm. Why? This unique punishment raises so many questions. Is it possible that even in our darkest moments, even in the face of horrific acts, there's, I don't know, a glimmer of divine mercy?
I never thought about it like that. It's like even in punishment, there's a thread of hope,
Mm,
or at the very least, an acknowledgement of just how messy and complex we are as humans.
exactly. We're capable of immense love and unimaginable cruelty, often driven by the same primal emotions. And these early chapters of Genesis, they aren't just abstract morality tales, right? They provide this incredibly powerful lens through which to examine the entire spectrum of human experience. What about these early stories resonates most with you?
It's funny you should ask. I've always been struck by how, I don't know, relatable these characters are. I mean, yeah, sure, they're talking to God, they're grappling with the fate of humanity, but at their core, they're dealing with the same struggles we all face: temptation, jealousy, envy, making decisions, good or bad, that have lasting consequences. They might be living in a different time, but their humanity, their very human flaws and complexities are what make them relatable even after all these centuries.
I agree. It's that timeless human element that gives these stories their enduring power. We see ourselves reflected in these characters, even when the details of their lives are vastly different from our own. But you're right, the drama doesn't stop there. In fact, it's about to get biblical. Genesis doesn't let up on the action, and those genealogies you mentioned earlier, they might seem like a dry list of begats, but they're essential for understanding the narrative.
It's true. Those genealogies are like, I don't know, the world's oldest family tree, meticulously linking each generation to the next, creating this continuous thread from Adam all the way down to, well, you'll see.
It really connects it all.
But I think it's safe to say, when most people think of this section of Genesis, one story comes to mind: Noah's Ark. I mean, it's one of those tales that's practically woven into our cultural DNA.
Absolutely. The flood narrative, as it's often called, unfolds in chapters 6 through 9, and it's really a powerful exploration of judgment and destruction, but also, the possibility of renewal and second chances.
It's like humanity messed up big time.
Yeah, it's like humanity has strayed so far from its intended path that God feels genuine sorrow, even regret. But out of this despair comes this radical decision to start over, symbolized by Noah, this seemingly ordinary man tasked with, an extraordinary responsibility.
Now, let's not forget about that ark, packed to the rafters with two of every living creature. It's like this floating testament to both the destruction and the hope for a new beginning.
A floating zoo.
Can you imagine? Two of every creature. The logistics alone.
It boggles the mind.
But what always stands out to me is what happens after the floodwaters recede. We get that beautiful, enduring image of the rainbow and that powerful covenant between God and humanity.
You're right, that image of the rainbow, it's become practically universal. It's a symbol of hope, of promise.
You see it everywhere.
And it's directly tied to this story. In chapter 9, God establishes a covenant with Noah, promising never again to destroy the earth with a flood. And that rainbow, it serves as a visible reminder of that promise, a physical manifestation of God's commitment to humanity.
I mean, it's incredible how much that image resonates even today. You see it in art, in literature, even in pop culture. It's almost become synonymous with hope itself.
It really has. And it speaks to the enduring power of this story. It's been interpreted and reinterpreted in countless ways throughout history, sometimes as a literal historical event, sometimes as a more symbolic representation of spiritual cleansing, sometimes even as a cautionary tale about the dangers of human excess.
Right, like there are so many layers to it.
But one thing's for sure, the story of the flood, much like that rainbow, it's endured for millennia.
And it introduces this really important concept in the Bible, the idea of a covenant, this binding agreement between God and humanity with responsibilities on both sides. And you see this idea of a covenant pop up again and again throughout the Bible.
Oh, absolutely. It's a recurring theme. That flood narrative, with its themes of judgment, mercy, covenant, renewal, it hasn't just shaped religious thought, it's also had a profound impact on the development of Western law, the very concept of
Oh,
justice.
wow. How so?
Well, think about it. The idea of a binding contract, right? An
Mhm.
agreement with consequences for violating its terms. It has echoes of that ancient covenant established with Noah.
I'd never thought about it like that. So we've gone from creation to the fall, a murder mystery, a global flood. You'd think humanity would have gotten the message by now.
You'd think.
But it's nope. Which brings us to that infamous tower in the land of Shinar, the Tower of Babel.
Yes, the Tower of Babel. Genesis chapter 11. Here we have humanity, finally united by a common language, deciding to build a tower so high that it reaches the heavens. It's a story about ambition, about, let's be honest, arrogance, and about the dangers of reaching beyond our grasp.
They wanted to make a name for themselves, become like gods. And if there's one thing we've learned from Genesis so far, it's that, well, challenging the divine order rarely ends well.
Tell me about it. And in this case, it leads to a scattering of people, a confusion of languages, and ultimately this shattering of that unified human ambition. But this story isn't just about a tower. It's a profound meditation on the power of language itself. Shared language, it has this incredible ability to unite us, to create communities, understanding, but it can also be used as a tool to divide, to exclude, to build hierarchies.
It's a powerful reminder that even our greatest achievements, our most ambitious projects, can have unintended consequences. What seemed like this unifying goal, this desire to build something that would reach the heavens, ultimately led to greater division and misunderstanding.
Exactly. And it's a story that's as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. It makes us think about how we use language, how we build relationships, and how even the best intentions can sometimes have, unforeseen consequences.
It makes you wonder what they were thinking. But speaking of journeys and legacies, things are about to take a dramatic turn with the introduction of a man named Abram, who later becomes Abraham. And you know what? Everything we've talked about so far, all those foundational stories of creation, sin, covenants, the consequences of human ambition,
It's all connected.
they're all about to converge in a completely new and unexpected way. You're right, with Abraham, things are going to change. But first, we've got to find out what happens to Joseph. Last we left him, his brothers, they sold him into slavery, shipped him off to Egypt. Talk about a rough week.
It's rough.
But you hinted at, like, a rags to riches arc for him.
You could say that.
How's he go from prisoner to, well, not quite king, but pretty darn close?
Joseph's story is really one for the ages. It's about resilience, the power of staying true to yourself, even when everything around you feels, chaotic and unfair.
Yeah, he gets put through the ringer.
He does. He faces false accusations, imprisonment, and yet he holds on to his integrity, his faith, and, that remarkable ability to interpret dreams.
Yeah.
And remember Pharaoh's troubling dreams, the ones with the cows and the grain that no one in his court could decipher.
Oh yeah, those dreams had everyone stumped. But Joseph, he steps in, not just with the interpretation, but with a brilliant plan to save Egypt from, well, basically impending doom.
Exactly. He sees those dreams as a warning, a chance to prepare. He understands that 7 years of abundance will be followed by 7 years of devastating famine. But he doesn't just interpret, he takes action. He convinces Pharaoh to stockpile grain during those plentiful years. And it's this foresight, this willingness to act boldly, that ultimately saves Egypt and sets the stage for Joseph's own incredible rise to power.
Okay, so famine hits the land, people are desperate for food, and guess who shows up in Egypt needing grain?
Who's that?
Joseph's brothers.
Oh, no.
Completely unaware that the powerful Egyptian official they're bowing down to
This is going to be good.
is their long-lost brother.
Part.
Talk about an awkward family reunion.
It's a classic moment of dramatic irony, isn't it? Joseph recognizes them instantly, but they have no idea who he is.
And what does he do?
Well, he tests them. He puts them through this series of trials to see if they've changed, if they've learned anything from the terrible act they committed all those years ago. He needs to know if they're still capable of the same cruelty, the same heartlessness they showed him.
He even accuses them of being spies, throws one of them in prison. If I didn't know better, I'd say he was holding a bit of a grudge.
Well, remember, Joseph isn't just grappling with his own personal pain and betrayal. He carries the weight of his family's deception, the years of grief his father endured, believing his favorite son was dead. He needs to know if his brothers are truly remorseful, if they understand the magnitude of what they did. It's about justice, yes, but even more than that, it's about forgiveness.
So it's not about revenge.
No.
It's more about making them confront their past, prove that they become, Well, better men than they were back then.
Exactly. And ultimately, this long and winding path leads to forgiveness, to reconciliation. Joseph, he engineers this dramatic reunion, revealing his identity in a way that, well, I imagine it must have been both terrifying and cathartic for his brothers. It's a powerful moment of reckoning, of facing the consequences of our actions, but also of the possibility of redemption and healing.
So they reconcile. After all that drama, all that deception, they actually find a way back to each other.
They do. It's a tearful, powerful scene of forgiveness and acceptance. Joseph, having tested his brothers, seeing their genuine remorse, he chooses to forgive. He recognizes that even their betrayal was, in this strange way, part of a larger divine plan. And in that act of forgiveness, there's this sense of release, a lifting of that burden of anger and resentment that can, well, poison a family, even generations later.
It's a beautiful reminder that even the deepest wounds, most unthinkable betrayals can be healed. Forgiveness, as difficult and messy as it might be, it's always possible.
Always possible. And it's this act of forgiveness, this willingness to move forward, that really paves the way for the family's future. Joseph brings his entire family to Egypt, where they settle in this fertile region called Goshen. They thrive, they prosper, and in a sense, they find peace.
So Genesis ends on a hopeful note. After all that drama, all those trials and tribulations, this family that seemed, destined for disaster, finds a way to not only survive, but to thrive.
In a way, yes, but it's important to remember that this isn't, a fairy tale ending. The family might be safe and prosperous, but they're also living in exile. The promise God made to Abraham, the promise of a homeland, of a nation descended from his loins, well, that's a promise that will take generations to fulfill. And this, my friend, is the beauty of Genesis. It's not just an ending, it's a beginning. It sets the stage for the entire saga of the Bible, a story that continues to explore the complex relationship between humanity and the divine, our capacity for both incredible love and, unimaginable cruelty. And this persistent yearning for meaning and connection in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Creation, the fall, floods, family feuds, betrayal, forgiveness, you name it, Genesis has got it.
It's quite the book.
As we come to the end of our deep dive here, what are some key takeaways you hope our listener will, carry with them?
I think the most important takeaway is that these stories, however ancient they might seem, still have this incredible power to move us, to challenge us, and to help us make sense of our own lives and the world around us. They grapple with such timeless human questions. What does it mean to be human? What is our responsibility to each other? How do we find meaning and purpose? These are questions that have resonated throughout history, and they continue to resonate with us today.
Genesis, like you said, it's both a beginning and an ending. It lays the groundwork for this incredible story that will span millennia, but it also stands on its own as this powerful reflection of the human experience.
It really does. And as you continue exploring the Bible, pay attention to the echoes of Genesis. You'll see these foundational stories, these themes of covenant and exile and redemption reflected in the prophets, in the Psalms, in the life and teachings of Jesus. Genesis isn't just the beginning of a book, it's the beginning of a conversation that has shaped our understanding of who we are, where we come from, and where we might be going.
So much to think about. Well, we've reached the end of our Genesis deep dive, but as we've discovered, it's really just the beginning of a much larger journey. There's this whole library of stories, wisdom, and challenges waiting to be explored. What will you discover next?